Hello guys and welcome to Sound Design Monday. Today we're going to be creating a PWM wave which is going to be found in the VA section, which is called virtual analog. I think it's virtual analog of massive oscillator section. So we're going to be using just the PWM waves in oscillator 1 and 2, and we're going to be creating this sound. Lower octave, higher octave. Okay, so that's how the sound is going to sound like. So make sure to stick around, learn how to make it, and increase your knowledge in sound design. Okay, so let's get started. So first thing we're going to do is in oscillator 1, in massive, we're going to be applying a pulse saw PWM wave from the virtual analog section. And pretty much here what we have our controls for the pulse width, which is obviously going to be the width of the wave we're going to be using, and then the position of the pulse saw. So we want all of this up, even the amp, and we're going to leave this in the center. And next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into oscillator 2, negative 0.11 pitch here. And sorry, I forgot to mention for oscillator 1, 0.11 as well. The reason for that is just adding a little bit of, honestly, I would say detuning, and it just makes the sound a lot bigger when you tend to do this technique where you just change the pitch for a very minimal amount. So once we have that in oscillator 2, same thing. We're going to have pulse saw all the way up, pulse width all the way up, amp all the way up, and in the center. Okay, next thing we're going to be doing is we are going to be going into the noise section. We're going to be applying some white noise, and the color is going to be at 3 o'clock. Color is going to control pretty much the frequency the noise is in. The amp is going to decide how loud it is. We're going to have it at 10, and we're going to leave that in the middle. Okay, now we're going to filter 1. We're going to push it all the way up. We're going to be having the cutoff all the way down for this, and we're going to put the resonance a little bit up around 8 o'clock. Since this is a new series, what resonance is going to be this. When you apply an auto filter in Ableton, you're going to be greeted by a visual representation of a low pass filter here. It's a very standard filter, and the resonance is going to be this point here. You see how the higher it gets, the lower it gets, so forth. Well, that's what your resonance is going to be doing here in massive. So this is the visual representation of what's going on here. Low pass 2 filter is just going to be a fancy way of just saying it's a type of low pass that isn't going to take that much off. And then low pass 4 is a little bit more, it takes a little bit more off. Just stick that in your head. Really no sense into getting into the technicality. Whenever you're working on your sounds, tend to investigate like, oh, this type of filter kind of makes this oscillator, this wave type, turn distorted and so forth. Like after a while of doing sound design, creating your own sounds, you don't really need to know what certain things are doing. You just need to know how they're gonna affect your sound. And then if you want to get into like what they do, then go for it, by all means, but it's not gonna help in sound design at all. Especially when I'm saying, oh, I'm just going to saturate this, and I'm going to be saying that all I'm doing is adding harmonics to it. You're like, okay, how does that sound? Okay, so here we have a low pass 2, cutoff all the way down, resonance at 8 o'clock, so it's a little bit up. Filter, we're going to put the volume on this all the way up. That's all this is going to do. Okay, so once we have that, and this is a really simple sound, we're going to go into our amp envelope, which is going to be envelope 4. By default, massive routes envelope 4 to the amp. And the amp is another way of saying where sound comes out of. Just think of a guitar amp. So when you're playing a guitar, you connect the amp to the guitar, and the amp is where everything's released. And sometimes the amp carries like distortion and neat effects on this, but not in massive. Okay, so in envelope 4, what we're going to do is we're going to have the attack all the way down, which is pretty much going to let the sound, like in the previous tutorial I explained, it's going to let the sound come out just instantly. And we're going to have the level all the way up. You always want your level up. There's no reason to have the level down in an attack unless you're like really don't want any sound to come out. Next, we're going to have our decay set at around 1 o'clock. And remember, the decay is just how fast it's going to go into our sustain level, which is going to be controlled by this level here. So here you can see the decay happening. And our level is going to be at 2 o'clock. We're going to have a release of 2. At 2 o'clock. So the release again is how long the song sticks around before it goes back to 0. So just remember that stuff. It's really important to know what ADSR is. I believe as long as you know what ADSR is, then you're ahead of the game. A lot of people don't even know what ADSR is. And just remember, ADSR, you can apply it to turning knobs, turning certain parameters. Shit, you can even apply it to LFO. So remember, ADSR, learn it. It's not that difficult. Attack is pretty much how fast it's going to go to max volume. Decay is how fast it's going to go to the sustain level you're going to put. And that's the ADS already. And the R is just how long it's going to take for it to go back to 0 value. That's the easiest way of putting it, instead of me saying the attack is going to decide how, you know, and then just getting into technical terms. Just remember that and you'll be fine. Okay, so once we have that for envelope 4, now we're going to envelope 1. Now, the reason we're going to be applying some envelope here, we're going to be doing it to the pitch and to our filter cutoff. And we're also going to be doing it to our, we're going to apply an LFO to our oscillator 1 to change the pitch a little, add a little bit of LFO there, and I'll explain why later. So for here, we're going to be applying the attack at around 8 o'clock. Level a little bit around 4, so you put it all the way max and decrease it a little. You don't want it at full value. The reason for this is just because, I mean, like, generally people tend to put these envelopes on their filters and they go a little bit overboard when they start routing how much you want of it. So I just do that for a little bit of safety for me. I'm sure there are various other ways. I just really haven't looked into it. I see a lot of sound engineers tend to keep the level down. I haven't really noted why. Maybe I'll figure it out later. But for now, that's my only reason for doing it. And we want, once we have this, we want our decay at 9 o'clock and level at 11. And then our release at 11 o'clock. So remember ADSR. So pretty much this is going to be routed and to, let's say, the filter cutoff here. And you notice it's blue. Here's one blue. So you see the blue, the max value is here. So when we're working with the attack, you see the attack is going to be little, it's going to take a little, it's not all the way down, so it's not going to be instant. It's at around 8 o'clock. So what's going to happen, it's going to take this much of a value for the knob to turn all the way here. So the level is going to decide how much of it is actually going to occur. So if I have the level down, what's going to happen, instead of reaching here, it's going to reach around here. And then we have our decay phase, which is going to go down to the sustain level. So let's say our sustain level, because it allows us to see, it's going to be around here, around 9 o'clock. Then what's going to happen, the decay is going to take this long, whatever you set it to. So this is pretty fast to go down to the sustain level. And then at the sustain level, release is going to start to kick in, and we have it at a value of 11, and then the release is going to happen. Now, it's not going to happen as this slow. It tends to happen a lot faster, but that gives you a sense of what the phases are in ADSR: attack, decay, sustain, and release. Okay, so hopefully that kind of clears things up a little bit more when you're applying it to certain things. In Silent 1, same thing, you route it to the cutoff, you can route it to all kinds of parameters. And if you buy like synths, usually they have them as well. Okay, so once we have that, we're going to route this envelope 1 to our filter 1 here. And we're going to pretty much click and pull up to around 12 o'clock, okay? Yeah, let's do that 12 o'clock. Let's see how it sounds. Yeah, it should be fine. Okay, and once we have that, you should have some sound coming out, but not that much, because we're going to be applying a macro and turning it a little bit up so you get more sound out. Okay, so once we have that, now we go and get the envelope 1 again, and we're going to be applying it down here. And you want to put this around 0.29 pitch change up, so not negative up. So again, what's going to happen here is ADSR is going to affect the pitch, and it's going to use the characteristics of ADSR, which you guys know is the attack decides how fast it reaches 0.29 and so forth. I really don't need to get into it anymore. Now I'm going to go into LFO 5. Now LFOs are pretty much knob turners again, but they use a different characteristic. The way I see it is they use certain waves. So if I have a square wave, what's going to happen is you get to change how you want the square wave to react with the LFO. Generally, you're just going to leave it like this, a normal square. And what's going to happen is with a square LFO is the change is very rapid. So if you look at the slope of this, and the slope is pretty much how the line is changing over time. As you can see here, the slope of this is linear, and here it's more like sudden. There's no slope. It's like pretty much 0. And here in our sine wave, there's more of a slope to it. So in the square wave, what's gonna happen is this is just gonna occur really fast. Okay. And the reason for applying it to the pitch of the oscillator, so it's because it gives it more of, it gives it an accent, and it makes it have a little bit more character. If you were to buy a preset pack, and this is something I encourage a lot as well, but it can go either both ways, is that you get lazy and start using the preset. But the way I learned sound design, and I always get asked how did I learn, is I used to be a preset junkie, and what that means is I would buy preset packs and all that stuff because sound design looked really intimidating. But what you don't understand is when you buy presets, you're buying pretty much the blue, I think it's the, let's just say the plans the sound design maker had. So you get to see everything he did in order to create that sound. And what you can start doing is you can start buying these presets packs, or you can even download my preset, my SoundBanks off my page. And what you can do is you can start taking off certain effects, start taking off certain LFOs being routed to certain things, and then turn them on and off, and you'll get to see what effect that does. So once you see that effect, you notice, okay, he's using a square wave, and he's routing an LFO to the pitch, and it gives him more of an accent, it gives him more punch, it gives him more characteristics. That's what you get with preset packs. You buying the sound designer's work. You're buying his techniques, because if you study every little thing he did, you're gonna know some of his secrets. And that's what sound design is all about. It's experimenting. Some people can create amazing sounds through experimentation, and they find certain techniques. And a lot of people pay for these presets, and they don't see the outcome. They just see, okay, I get to use presets. I don't have to I save time. Instead of creating my own presets, I can use this and make tracks faster. But you're missing the point as well, that you're also getting their blueprint for their sounds, and you can get a lot of information from that stuff. So that's how I learned sound design. I know I'm getting a little bit off track, but this is a new series, and I kind of want this series to be more on learning stuff rather than getting the preset and using it. Okay, so once we have the LFO here, what you're going to do is you're going to drag LFO 5 here, and then you're going to put negative 0.9. So there's going to be a change here as well, and you're going to leave the rate as it is. If we put this at 0, there's not going to be much change. It's very minimal, the change that's happening with the LFO there, but it's hearable. But it's not that much, but little things like that add up, and you create great sounds with it. So remember that technique. I always do it in most of my sounds. If you get my sounds, you'll see that I like to LFO pitches at high rates, and envelope pitches sometimes as well. And that's just something I do. It's a technique I learned honestly from downloading one of the Vandalism Shocking Sounds. I think it was 8 or 7, and I noticed that a lot of the guys that were making the sounds for Vandalism were using that technique. So I started incorporating it, and then it turns out to creates really nice trance sounds. And I recommend doing that for super saw waves, square waves mainly, not on basses. I don't think it would work well with a bass. Okay, so once we have that LFO applied there, pretty much now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the voicing section of Massive. This is where you get to decide your unisono, pretty much unison, in other words. So here we're going to be applying 4 voices. And as you see, the more voices you apply, the louder it gets. 4, 5, 6, and so on. So that's all that's going to happen. In order to be able to use the pitch cutoff, or I like to call it the detuner in Massive, you're going to have to apply a decent amount of unisono here. And next, we're going to be having it in polyphon. And all polyphon means it's more than one. So polyphon allows you to play more than one note. So if you're making a bass line, generally you'll leave it in monophon, unless you're playing a bass line that's kind of inspired by something Artie would do, which is a bass line with a lot of harmony in it. And next, we have mono rotate, which is just another way of, honestly, it's just another version of monophone. I really don't know what mono rotate is. I never use it, but I'll look into it, and hopefully next tutorial I can actually use it for a sound. Okay, next we have trigger here, and it's just really always trigger you play. So here we have the pitch cutoff, and we're going to be leaving it at 1 by default. It should be that way. And we're going to be applying a detune, a pitch cutoff of around 4. So just put it around here, like a little bit halfway until you reach the center. Next, we're going to be putting pan position, which is the stereo. If you have it in mono, It's going to be in the center of the mix. Full, it's going to be spread, and full invert is just another version of full. So just play with this and see what you like. Remember, it's not what the meaning of it is, it's how it's going to sound like. Okay, so next here we're going to go into our effects section of Massive, and here we have the effects one, which is a reverb. Always reverb makes sound huge, and it's always recommended. So for our FX1 reverb, we're going to be pulling the dry and wet at around 9, our size at 12, density at a little bit before 12, and our color at 2. And then we're going to go into our dimension expander. A dimension expander is going to make it sound huge. It's going to pretty much widen the sound. To me, it sounds like putting a utility on it, but a utility with balls. A technique I like to use for pads is I like to increase the width to 125 with the utility. And pretty much the dimension expander in Massive is huge. I always use it for any type of trance sound that's going to be the main center of attention. And you guys should get around to using it. And it's really, really simple to use. You have the size and dry and wet, and that's it. And really, I don't really need to explain how to use this. I'm sure you guys can figure it out. It's just 2 knobs. Next, we go into our Q section. We're going to do a little low shelf. And what a low shelf is if we go into our EQ8 from Ableton, you're going to see here we have this. And all a low shelf is this. That's what a low shelf is. So pretty much anything behind this is going to increase. And a high shelf, which is vice versa, is just going to be the opposite of that. So everything towards the highs increases in front of this. So that's what that's saying here in Massive, the EQ section. So just to give you guys a visual representation. I mean, that's what I like about Massive's envelopes is that they give it to you visually, but I wish they would have done it with everything. But again, the layout is pretty amazing. So here we have low shelf, set it to 12, a little bit in front of 12, boosted at 1, frequency at 2, high shelf at 2 o'clock. So remember what those things do. Okay, so once we have that, I'm sure we should be set. All we need to do is apply our macros. Something a lot of people fail to do a lot as well is when they create their sounds, they fail to apply macros. And macros are a way of taking your music to the next level. What a lot of new producers fail to do is they feel really, really insecure, and they don't really step out of the box and start automating stuff. And the way you're going to achieve those professional tracks is through automation. You need automation in your track, or else your sounds are going to sound boring. So it's good to apply macros to your sounds to make automating easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to be applying 2 macros. Okay, here we have a macro 1. So it's going to look like this. We're going to be naming it Cutoff here. So just name it Cutoff. Drag this below the Cutoff here. And all these little boxes you see underneath in Massive is all of that is able to be LFO'd or enveloped. So here we're going to be applying it to filter Cutoff. And what you're going to do is it's going to look like this. You're going to click and drag it all the way to 3 o'clock. And now you're gonna put this knob to 12 o'clock. And at the high point of this knob, the max volume, obviously it's gonna be at here, your knob. So that's pretty much all it's saying. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna be applying another macro, number 2, call it Reverb. And you're gonna be applying it to your dry and wet and to your size. So they're gonna correlate with each other. So the higher the wet is, the higher the size goes. And this is gonna give you a neat effect if you use it well. Pretty cool. So our reverb is going to be set at around 9 o'clock. Let me see. There we go. 9 o'clock should be fine. And what you're going to do is you're going to drag it under the dry and wet and the size. And all you're going to do is click and go pull up. So for size 3 o'clock and for dry and wet 12 o'clock. Okay, so once we have that, our sound is pretty much complete, guys. Pretty much that's it for this tutorial. I really did get into a lot of things. I know I got a little bit off track, but this is for your own benefit. Like I said, guys, make sure if you're going to be downloading my presets or SoundBanks, make sure to try and take like 1 day out of your whole week or once a month to try and reverse engineer some of that stuff to improve your sound design. Another great tip I give people is buy presets, but don't get in the habit of seeing presets as, oh, I'm going to use them. See it as a blueprint that the artist that created those presets, and obviously you like their work enough to buy it, see what they did in order to create those sounds, and then try and emulate it yourself. And that's going to be called reverse engineering sounds, and it's one of the best ways to learn sound design on your own without tutorials. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. This has been Trance Design episode 2 with Zen World. I have a podcast going on right now that I'm going to be starting at the end of February, and I would really appreciate if you guys would submit some of your own works. Don't worry, none of your music is going to get stolen. I'm just pretty much making this podcast to pretty much kind of, motivate people to finish their tracks and have somewhere to submit them. So, like, okay, the podcast is coming up. I got to finish this track, because a lot of new producers fail to do that. And I'll get into that in another video. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. This has been Trance Design episode 2 with me, Zen World. The preset for this will be up on my page as always. And I hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you guys maybe this week or next week. We'll see.